when Tom first asked me to do this, I'm trying to figure out, well, what do you want me to say, Tom? What's the topic? What's the conversation we should talk about? So, I thought about, well, what can I say? There's so much to say, right? In so much limited time. So what I want to do is say a few things, then just go with a question-answer type of deal of questions that you may have. But I think one of the first things to do is this: before you know where you're going, you have to do a current analysis and figure out where you are now or how you got there. So to start that, I'll just give you a little background for myself. Like Tom, we're first generation Americans, coming here. So our parents, bringing us over and starting a new life, and that was in itself a difficult process. We joked about our grades. It wasn't just the grades that we had to focus in on. It was just life, fitting in, how to respond, my social interactions with folks. But I was lucky because I had good mentors. My father, who's actually my stepfather, who raised us, was a U.S. Army soldier. And my brother, older brother, he always was the first to jump out the door, So whatever he did, I kind of followed, and it just tended to work out. So I've been with the Tacoma Police Department for over 29 years now. I started in 1989. And in 1987 is when I first went to basic and AIT, and I started my military career. And I'm in both careers right now, so still going through that learning process. We talked about this, I think college, okay, so in high school, I have to tell you, I didn't have much interest in it, and it wasn't challenging for me. So, but eventually when I went to college, went to get my bachelor's and get my master's, and when I started to pay for it, is when I started paying attention a little bit more. So, and realizing that had direct interrelational relationship with the success that I wanted to have. So what the career map Tom was talking about is this. If you want to be successful, whether it's professional career, in civil service or in private, you got to have, what is your career roadmap? What do you really want to do? Because when people say, hey, this is my goal, and I hear it and I listen, I go, all right, then the follow-up question is, how are you going to get there? Do you actually have a roadmap to get there? It's not important, it's not just, you can't just say, hey, I want to be a successful business person and I'm going to be a multimillionaire. Well, we all do. And if it's that easy, everyone would be, very successful. But what steps do you take? I was very fortunate that the people that surround me were very successful. I stayed in the public service, but I literally watched a successful, entrepreneur in the form of my brother-in-law, because I knew him since, high school. From installing stereo equipment to selling cell phones to starting to build houses. Eventually, what happened was he became the second largest home builder in the state of Washington. And he sold that business. And then the only people that made more houses than him were Quadrant Homes. And this is a kid from Bethel that never went to college. So it's his mindset. So I was able to see what makes him successful. And what I saw with him is a no fear attitude and taking a lot of risks, big risks, big gains, and such. For me, I didn't take I took a little different route, more stability, more surety. But I think we're both successful in our own ways. But it's your measure of success. What do you really want? So that's why I say, what is your career roadmap? What does success mean to you? And we talked about this, mentors. Throughout the process, you have to have mentors. Without that, how are you going to bounce ideas off of what you're doing? For the most part, someone has done it before. Someone has stumbled. Someone has made successes. To be able to bounce that off of people who are successful in your particular business is very helpful. I take a look, and Brian and I, we had some same mentors, in the military, where we looked up to and listened to what they said. Not only did we learn from what they did, we also learned from what they shouldn't have done. So that's another aspect of it. So Tom asked me to talk about a little bit about leadership. What is leadership? To truly get what leadership is about, you have to know what is your natural inclinations of leadership. What is your natural leadership trait? Because trust me, every single buddy in here has one. And there's tests that you take, like the Myers-Briggs or the DISC profile, and it tells you what your natural inclination is. Like in a stressful situation or a creative environment, how do you naturally lead people? How do you naturally interact with people? So you have to know that. But that may not apply to every situation. So Ken Blanchard has this leadership style. They call it situational leadership. You know what your leadership style is. You know who you're working with. Just based upon developmental levels of who you are and who the people you're working with, you have to adjust. I mention that is because I hear this all the time. I hear people say, well, that's not my style of leadership, or that's not, this is the way I do it. I don't micromanage. And I think, yeah, that's so blanket. You can't say that. You may have to micromanage in a respectful manner still. If the person that's there has never done this task before, needs help, and is actually seeking guidance. So when they're seeking guidance and you go, well, I don't want to micromanage, people aren't listening. They're asking for help. They're asking for mentorship. They're asking for some guidelines. So that's one thing. The other thing is, sometimes I might go back and forth here, is people mention when we have to deal with issues in the workplace, we have supervisors that say, well, that's not my leadership style. That's not my, and I take a look, and because, my master's is in organizational leadership. So I tend to go a little nerdy on that piece. So I would say, so what is your leadership style? And they would tell me, hey, this is what I do, this is what I like. And I look and I go, yeah, I hear you. That is not a leadership style. That's your personality. There is a difference. A leadership style, there's academics involved in it. Studies done about leadership and the great traits of great leaders, and these are the competencies that great leaders show. And based upon that, you come up with transformational leadership, servant leadership. Those type of styles, those are styles of leadership. So when people go, this is the way I like to do it, that's your personality, but your personality is getting in the way. So I mentioned that, so you take these tests to know who you are, how you normally respond to certain situations, you know that, and then be able to adjust from that. Just one more thing I'll talk about that is brand new supervisors leading people. When we hire people to be supervisors, to be managers, we want you to be effective. You have to lead people, A lot of people would be good leaders, but people get in the way, right? Well, you can't. The people are the reason why you're leaders. That's why you're there to motivate them and to guide them through the whole process. So with that said, know what we're asking you to do as an organization, but also what you believe in, and I'm going to talk about values in a little bit. One of the pitfalls I see is when new leaders, they want to be friends with people. They don't want to say the hard things. They don't want to have those hard conversations, and they actually think they're doing a favor to someone. You're not. You're actually hurting that person's career development, because this is the reason why. If we're having a conversation and there is an issue that's coming up, it's better that for myself as a leader to come and talk to you and say, hey, we need to have this conversation. This is a piece that we need to work on to develop, and we're going to work on this together. Then hopefully you're changing that behavior of that specific individual. Because what I've seen is people who are supervisors who want to be friends and they don't have that conversation. They turn a blind eye, and that problem escalates to a point now we have to let somebody go and say, say, you know, you can't be part of this organization because you violated this, or we don't have the same philosophical approach to it. Wow, what a waste. You wasted everyone's time and opportunity when we could have just had that quick conversation and the quick leadership and that mentorship to get the person back on the right path. So that's one of the things that, you know, part of the experiences that I've seen and part of what I read. One thing I do want to talk about too is values. This is where I've had these conversations over and over with people within my organization. So in a good organization, right? In a good, highly functional organization, you're going to get together and you guys are going to create a vision, mission, and values. So everybody knows where you're going, you know? You want everyone on the same sheet of music. So we're talking about values. So within the Tacoma Police Department, we came together and we came up with our values. And in the Army, we have our own values, the Army values. But what values, it's not just important just to say what your values are. You have to live it. The leaders and the people in the organization have to live the values. Because even though the Army values are strong, we take a look at it and go, well, then why do all these general officers and high-grade officers get in trouble? Because value to virtue is not there. They're not living those values. They're giving it lip service. Do as I say, not as I do. That's exactly right. So that's the issue. Then that means you have to regroup and figure out what do we need to do to get back on track. You know, so on the Tacoma Police Department, we did values, and I'm going to give you a couple. Respect is one of them. Respect to our employees and to our citizens. Act with integrity. Team for the common good. So those are some of those values that we have within the Tacoma Police Department. And when you choose not to live within those values, we're going to hold you accountable for it. When that comes up, we're going to hold you accountable. So one of the things, the reason I mention that is this: as you work in an organization, and it could be you work in an organization, they said, these are our values. And you take a look and go, but they conflict with my values, my own personal values. That, you know, I believe family is first before accountability, or whatever values that you specifically have. And I have these conversations with folks, and I go, I do understand, and I respect your values, but there's a reason why we have our own organizational values. When you come to work, if there's an ethical dilemma when those two values conflict, our work values will always come first. And if you can't live within those work values, you got to find a different organization. Because not just for us, but for the individual, because you're going to have the inner conflict. So that's one of the things. And I smile and laugh because one of the things I would say is we had to deal with this situation where this person he wasn't acting within our integrity and respect, and I think money issues came before other issues. And the way he was doing his behavior changed. So one of the things I told him is this: look at our values, and where in our values do you see sneaky? Sneaky isn't one of our work values. So you know what I mean? You go back to, but you just said it, you got to live it. If you don't live the values, you don't practice the values, then they're no good. It's just paper on the wall.
Mike, in your annual evaluations for TPD, similar to the OER and NCOER, you know how the values are first.
Yes.
Yes, no.
Yes.
Even before performance.
Right.
Right. You get name, duty, position, and then the values. And did said soldier live up to or uphold those values?
Right.
Yes, no. And then we look at how we did the performance. Is in your evaluation with TPD, because I don't think, I've said that it was only in the military, it's the only organization I've been a part of where we're held accountable, written to our values or to the organizational values. Is that a part of the TPD annual evaluation?
We do. So on a quarterly counseling session, one of the things we do is there's a quarterly counseling, and within that document, it's one full page, and it just says the values.
Okay. That's good.
You know, are you the mission values, you know, mission, vision, and values? So we discuss that, and we definitely talk about that particular piece. So with that, one of the things that we did change, and you guys know this, how many policies are there in an organization? Way too many for us to remember. So is it the policies that we're concerned with? Because really, when we say policies, it's guidelines, right? We're not talking about laws. So if you violate a policy, depending on the policy, some are really bad, some are, do we really care? So one of the things we did in the last few years is we're transitioning from a policy-based organization to a values-based organization. So that means if we go out there and in law enforcement, you know, a lot of gray areas. Depending on what you did, a lot of times, I bet people violate policies by the hundreds, right? So if you did something and we had this conversation and you acted within our values and said, what was your intent when you did your action? It may have violated some policies. But we have to be able to stop, take a look at that and go, but your intent was honorable. What you did, what you thought you were going to do, your values were right on. So we can say, and that's where we have our different own terminology. So when we say exonerated means you did what someone alleged that you did. It might have violated a policy, but we understand and we support what you did, so we exonerate you. That's, so that's the process we're trying to go from a policy-based to a values-based organization.
So can I stop right there? So as you guys develop your own business, this is really important. That's why I'm so glad that Mike's talking about value versus policy, because being an entrepreneur and starting your business, you got to really think outside the box. If you just go down the list and say boom, 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 policies and rules, you're not going to make any money. Whatever, but we're not saying go break the law, but what's it, the values is important, because this is the land for sand that you're not going to cross. You cross it, it's just like, okay, your company's not worth nothing. So, but anyway, I just wanted to add that.
No, and that's a great point. So there's a difference. Like, I will tell you, I think by myself in a civil service, in a government position, there are certain safeguards I have. I can make some mistakes and I can continue to move on. But in a private business, if your integrity is at stake or your honesty is at stake, that could be the end of your business. That's a huge difference. So exactly what you just said, Tom. So it's important to have those established and for your folks. And don't ever assume because you know it and you feel that way, the people within your organization feels the same way. So one of the things I talked about, and Tom asked me to say, I was in another presentation, and they asked me to talk about some stuff. Brian, you might have been there, and it was my rucksack analogy. And we'll just call it leadership in a rucksack. So in the military, in the Army, especially in infantry, we live out of our rucksack. And everyone knows what that is, right? It's just a big giant backpack. So we live it. So if you didn't carry it in, you don't have it. You got to make sure clothing, food, tools, and stuff. So, but your rucksack only can carry about 65 to 85 pounds of stuff. So what do? So experience tells us is this: where are we, and where are we going, and how long we're going for. Based upon that, we pack our ruck to meet the mission. Same thing in life. So what I've seen is this, as we go through life in a rucksack, we're constantly, this experience, this schooling, this knowledge, this conversation, we're throwing it in our rucksack. But every once in a while, you gotta stop, assess, take a look in and go, do I still need this? I'll keep it there. Do I not need this? And take it out. The reason why I say that, because if you don't, it's the extra baggage is going to slow you down. It's going to prevent you. When I say that, what do I mean? Well, you don't want to get into a negative reinforcing loop when when I hear people say, you know, every time I go over here, this is what happens, something negative. And we talk about it and go, okay, let's take a look, talk through the situation. What have you done to break that cycle? Well, what do you mean? I haven't done anything. But why do you expect different results then if you don't change that cycle? You don't break that cycle. So that's why I'm talking about what the rucksack is the same thing. What I see, for the most part, why people aren't successful in my line of work has just been people's attitudes and baggage. You know, because something negative happened to you 15 years ago, you're still holding people accountable, or you're spreading negativity on people who aren't even involved at that situation. Only thing that's doing is holding us back as individuals. We have to be able to take a look at it, address it, and you may need some help. You know, with the rucksack analogy, so when we're in the military and I got to carry the M60, the M240, the big, you know, heavy cruiser machine gun, every once in a while, my buddy needs to help carry that so I can get a little break. Same thing in life. There's, with that rucksack, you have to be able to reach out to people to figure out who can help you. Your mentor is key. And your mentor may not be the same, and you could have multiple ones. There are so many people that I respect in our community, both in the military and law enforcement, that I can go to and talk to and have these conversations. So keep that in mind. And are you packing that rucksack the way you need to?
Question, you're at a level now that you need to talk to somebody. You can't talk to the patrol officers about issues. I mean, who do you talk to at a high level of where you're at?
Well, it's interesting you say that. I do talk to people so I have people who are peers of mine that never promoted. So they have 30 years on the police department as much as I do, and I have this issue. I go to them because they're at the ground level. They know exactly what the issue is. So if I just talk to the people at my level, they don't have the same level of being in touch with the issue. I could think of that issue and the problem within my own mindset, but if I don't open up my conversation and talk to people at different levels of the organization, so I'll talk to someone who's at the ground level, the middle level managers, the senior, bringing them together and listen to the different perspectives. And it goes back, and I don't like to bring in the people who think like I do. I know I'm limited in my thought process. If I brought in everyone who thought like I do, why do I need them in that room? They're going to say the same thing I'm already thinking. If you do that, you're doing that to reinforce what you're thinking. And are you really getting a benefit out of that? You know what I mean? You're really using that situation to promulgate your own perspective on it. And that's no good. You got to get people who think differently. So that's the reason why we would do that. When I say packing your rucksack, I knew what I wanted to do in my military career. I knew what I wanted to do in my civilian career. So do I just stay there and let chance happen, or do I create the steps? Well, when I get opportunities for school, friendships, you know, whatever I need to do to get that. Tom, I'll tell you, my high school time wasn't my academic career was very, very sad. But I knew in order for me to get from enlisted to commission and to continue on, I have to continue my education. So I did, you know, as a local guy, you guys know, I went to Pierce College. I went to Southern Illinois University for my bachelor's, went to Bradman for my master's, went to the Army War College for my, it's not because I like studying, but that's part of those packing lists that I knew I needed to be successful. But the interesting thing that happened along the way was this. I really enjoyed that. I really enjoy that because these are things that I learned at school and from experience, and I'm going, man, I could really use that to be in the workforce and to learn what it takes to be a better leader, right? One of the things that I've always heard was this: a growing organization is a learning organization. A learning organization is composed of people, individuals who are continuing their own leadership and own learning education process. By you learning individually helps your organization grow tremendously. I think, and also when it comes to that leadership, positional leadership. So I'm an assistant chief in the police department. I'm a colonel in the Army National Guard. I have positional leadership, but that doesn't mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm respected by people or I know exactly, what I'm doing or people are going to listen. By just using that positional leadership, and if you leverage that too much, you know what I mean? Are you truly a leader? Are you truly motivating? Are you truly getting that intrinsic value, with the people that you're working with? So you have those inherent leaders in the organization. That can be the patrol officer at the level, or your sergeant team leader. You got to ask them, and because you know why? Because when they talk, people in your organization listen. Man, what a good, what a natural leader. Those are natural leaders in an organization that you have to respect and you have to listen to. So those are some of my lessons learned, throughout my time both in the military and in the police department. I say these things, but I'm going to tell you this too, though. Some of the leadership things that we do in government work doesn't apply to entrepreneurship. And some of the most successful people I see in entrepreneurship are not rule followers. They don't like people telling them what to do. So what do? They create their own path. They create their own way. I have a few friends of mine who are very, very successful when it comes to financial situation. And there could be nobody better than them in generating funds and in creating, capital. But there's no way they would succeed in the leadership in the government work because they think differently. They don't like to be held within the confines of, if you're in the military or prior in the military, or even in an academic setting. We have certain rules and regulations. These folks do not like these rules and regulations, and they'll purposely violate that. I have a brother-in-law, very, very successful, and you can't confine him. He's wild, but that's what makes him successful. So Tom, I'll open up to any questions.
Well, no, I'm glad that's a good segue because we all know we have confines and all that, but I'm kind of glad you said that because entrepreneurship is a totally different animal. But on the other hand, within the organization of entrepreneurship, you have to have some rules and regulations that you have to follow because you don't want a whole bunch of John Waynes running around your organization and over-promising and doing all this kind of things because it's not going to be successful. And my biggest thing is that within entrepreneurship and corporate America, is how do you keep your people motivated if they're doing the same job? I know in the private sector, we can motivate them, entice them with money, but you can't do that in the private sector, in the public sector. I mean, how do you keep your patrol officers to, continue to be public servants and live by the values? But on the corporate America side, it's like, you know what? I need to make more money. Then we'll go out and sell more.
Right.
There's a balance there.
Yeah, and I'm going to tell you, and there's no secret formula to that because that's an everyday challenge that we specifically have. But in the military and in law enforcement and in the firefighting industry, if you look, these folks are different kinds of people. They have to have an intrinsic need to serve. So, you heard of the sheepdog mentality, right? There are people who need to do that. And these same people are the same ones in life, as you're growing up and stuff. They're the ones that didn't like bullies. They're the ones that were protecting others. They're the ones that's helping others. Those are the folks that we want to, bring forth into our type of profession. There's always exceptions, and sometimes those exceptions define the whole group. And that's why you're right. That's why we go through our leadership and management processes to to hold those values and to hold the people who don't hold the same values, we got to hold them accountable. And that becomes a difficult process. It's an everyday process, and there is no secret answer to it.
Wow. Okay. Any other questions? I mean, I have a whole bunch. I mean, I love listening to your talk, Mike. But how do you lead people who don't want to be led? I mean, they're part of your organization, but then again, you know, they're there for some reason. You hired them because of some reason.
Right.
But all of a sudden, they said, you know, Mike, if I was police chief for a day, this whole place would be better. You know, I mean, how do you confront that?
Yeah, so we still got to go through, and that's we call that the leadership challenge, right? We still have to do everything. You got to lead, you got to mentor, you got to provide opportunities. You got to have those conversations. But the bottom line is this: you got to hold people accountable. When people say, "Well, this is not what I want to do," or "This is not how I feel," and we acknowledge that. Let me re-emphasize, what our mission, our values, and what we expect from you, and then we're going to hold you accountable. It seems easy, but people have a hard time holding people accountable, because let's say in law enforcement, we talked about it. So our career spans about 30 years, plus or minus. When you grow up with people in your organization for that long, you can't help but be friends or know people or know their family members, know their kids growing up, right? And you think about in 30 years, you could have shared some life-changing experiences. Then one day, one of you will be the supervisor and have to hold the other accountable. That's challenging, right? But remember about leadership. Leadership is not about friendship. Leadership is about the ability to provide opportunities for people with varying different opinions, getting together to accomplish a common task. That's what leadership is, all about. Leadership is leading the change forward. So, and kind of going off on a different tangent, what I hear is kind of a pet peeve of mine is when people say we need leaders, not managers. And they go, managers is not what we need. And I hear that process and I'm going, what do they really mean by that? If they mean, do they want people to lead them, be in the front, not the one in the back, telling people what to do, but being, taking point, I get that. But as you go through the different layers of leadership, there are management skills you need. Management in projects, management in budget. Those skill sets, you have to have that to be a good leader. You can't just say, hey, I'm a leader, that's up for someone else. So when I hear that, it goes, no, we want you to be the leader. And that manager term is used very negatively, but you have to be a good manager in different aspects of your profession.
Yeah, the term I always use is I don't want managers, I want makers here. And another one I use is like, I always ask, what's your definition of entrepreneurship? And they kind of go back and they give me a Wikipedia answer. I said, I don't need that. I need an entrepreneur is, in definition here, is just you're a bad employee. Because you, like you said, you can't follow rules, you're in the box and all that. But part of it while you're here is just to give you a different perspective. You gotta balance it out somehow.
So I think whether it's in public or private businesses, you always have, let's just imagine it's a circle of tasks that you have to do. And within that circle of tasks that you have to do, you have to prioritize. So there's no way you're going to complete all those tasks. There's no way. But within that big circle of tasks, there is a priority of things that the organization wants, right? If you have to prioritize, these are the things you have to do. And within that, each individual has a particular passion that they want to do. Now, if the core task and the passion of an employee can mix together, and even in a small intersection of duties, we call that the sweet spot. Now, if you're as a leader, that's what you really want, to be able to find that sweet spot, that particular niche for that individual to perform that duty. Man, talk about a situation that's going to benefit everybody within the organization and the individual, right? So those are the hard things. It's not easy to do, and sometimes when you take them away from that sweet spot, then it can become issues. So, but as a leader, you have to continue to evaluate that piece.
Can you talk about the career of being in the Tacoma Police Department? Because I'm kind of limited because, this can only be so many chiefs, right? I mean, where can you go and where can you develop that career as a police officer? I mean, you can be, you can go so far, right?
Yeah, well, I think in any career it's like that, right? So what happens is, if me and my peers, all of us, wanted to be a captain, assistant chief, or the chief, and you can't. So at a certain point, you have to do that self-assessment and go, if I still want to be that person, I have to look elsewhere. Because the Tacoma Police Department is not the only entity that's out there, law enforcement. We have several law enforcement agencies in Pierce County alone, in the state of Washington, in the United States. So sometimes, if the opportunity is not there and that is your passion, that's your goal, you have to look elsewhere. And the losing department, the department that's going to lose an employee, still be supportive, because because that person can always come back and help you. Sometimes when you leave and you come back, you become a better employee, a better person because of the experience that you've had.
So it's not frowned upon if you go from Tacoma to Seattle and back from Seattle?
Oh, it happens all the time.
Oh, it happens all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't realize. Okay.
We have in the police and law enforcement, there is laterals. So once you are off your probation and stuff, you're not a new entry. So you have a different hiring process as a lateral officer.
Okay. So what keeps you up at night?
What keeps me up at night? For me, it's different than other folks, because I think it's because of my military career. What keeps me up at night is this. In the city of Tacoma, arguably the second largest city in the state of Washington, we always go back and forth with Spokane. And within our city, we have a power projection platform at a JBLM. Close by, you have these other naval stations with carrier groups, nuclear subs. So, and down in the port, we have we have one of the largest deep water ports in the United States. That's all in just Tacoma. That is a place where you can see how influential it is to the Northwest, to Western United States. For me, what keeps me up at night is, have I created, have I developed, have I partnered with all the agencies to make sure our homeland security is adequate to be that initial response, to be the initial eyes, working with the federal government, working with private agencies to keep that location safe. Because I think that's what keeps me up at night. It may not for others, because others don't have that same kind of passion, but for me, that force security, the defense of our nation, those things keep me up at night.
Here's another theory question. Are leaders made or born?
I think they're both. I think some people just have natural leadership tendencies. We talk about inherent leader. When we're growing up, there's always a leader in a group, whether we liked it or not, right? And there may be two leaders within the same group, and we knew that. But with that, leaders can be developed as well. Remember, when we talk about competencies, what's the competencies of strategic leaders? I know, there's three things that the Army War College teaches us. One is conceptual. You have to be conceptual. How relational interactions work, how systems approach, second, third order effects, all those things in the conceptual. Technical, you got to be technical, even at the highest ranks. Because if you don't, how do you have credibility when you talk about those issues? And the last thing is interpersonal skills. Within interpersonal skills, what do we talk? Emotional intelligence. And that's another thing. Are you born with emotional intelligence, or can you be developed? That's the same thing about the natural leadership. We know what makes these successful, so we can teach people. So I talked to a professor who had a doctorate in emotional intelligence, and I said, I've learned everything I've read. It said that emotional intelligence, you're born with it. Because you know how some people just say the inappropriate things all the time, and you're like, why do you do that?
Yeah.
So when people do that, that's sometimes where the emotional intelligence piece has to be developed. And I didn't think that if you didn't have it, you were never going to get it. But what the doctor told me was this: no, it can't. You can have that expectation. Remember about the accountability? So when you do talk to people, your peers, and when you talk to subordinates, we talk to your bosses, this is what we expect, how you talk to people. And if you don't, I'm going to hold you accountable. So the person who may not have that emotional intelligence that was fully developed, they know, oh, if I don't, I'm going to be held accountable to this. So it's both. You're born with it, but it can definitely be developed. So hopefully everyone understands what I mean by that emotional intelligence. I'm going to give you just an example. You can't keep going to someone and going, hey, this is what I need. Hey, did you get this done? The continuous bombardment. I haven't even developed that relationship. How's your day going? How's your kids going? Hey, is everything okay at home? Those interactions in itself. I learned a lesson the hard way from my daughter. One day, she's a teenager, and I was talking to her about certain things and certain tasks and chores that need to be done at home. Then one day she looked at me and she goes, Dad, do we ever do anything right? And I looked and I go, oh yeah, of course you do. You do so many things right. He goes, but you don't say it. Man, what a life-changing experience for me when my daughter said that to me. So, you know, those are, so even for myself, learning that emotional intelligence piece, even at home. So, hopefully that answers.
Oh, it does.
Yeah.
It does, because it's, most of it, it's, you think you know, but you really, sometimes you need to get reinforced to understand all that.
And if you had good friends, you had true friends, and you had people, they would say, when something like that happens, you know, at work, your friend may come to your side, you take you by the arm and goes, hey man, you could have handled that better. Mm-hmm. If you don't do that, the organization hurts, that individual hurts, and the people that was affected hurts.
I guess this is a question that it can go both ways for public and private sector. I know that, you know, you and I know that GPA doesn't mean anything. So my question is, when you hire, or maybe what your thoughts are, do you hire on a higher percentage of how people get along with people, or you hire on the technical aspects of that person? Because, you know, you and I know that, you know, the relationship is really important.
Right now for us in law enforcement, we're definitely have eyes on us, and rightfully so. There's things that we've done in law enforcement for the last 50 years that some things not to be proud of, some things to be very proud of. So if we take a look, just like we do a self-assessment and reflection, right? What are the things that we haven't done well in? And work on those particular issues. One thing we haven't done well on is that community relationship. You know what I mean? Understanding how we talk to people. It's that respect piece. So we rather hire you based upon your ability to interact and to understand people, because we could teach you the technical skills, you know? Because remember, a person who's most highest performing, but if they have a negative attitude, they're poisons, they're cancers to your organization. Regardless how successful individually that person is, eventually that person succeeds, but the rest of the organization suffers. So that's why we look at the values, we look at the people, what those skill sets. We can teach you the technical skills.
I'm not asking a lot of questions here. You guys don't have any questions? They're good.
I'm curious though. I think if I reflect back on my Army career, it's a miracle that I was able to stay in the organization to achieve retirement. Because I'm more of a creative entrepreneur type, but stuck in a rigid organization was very helpful. And I think that learning your left and right limits as an entrepreneur, and you're probably your brother-in-law who is wild, I would bet that he has his own boundaries that he's created. They may look different than what up at 6:30 shaved doing PT in the Army, but he still has
version of that.
he has his own he has his own disciplines that that he executes daily to achieve success and build that life. And I know I found I probably would have spun out and burned out as a civilian without these rigid boundaries in my military career, and I think law enforcement is probably similar, left and right limits on behavior, values, but I think for the budding entrepreneurs in here, I would say there's great value in clear guidelines, right? There's great, and if you don't have an external agency forcing them on you, then you're gonna have to figure them out yourself, and that's hard. That's infinitely harder than having an external agency create your boundaries. So everybody, success, the components of success, the underlying components are the same, and it's not random. So.
I think the values that he had were his left and right limits.
Yeah,
So his
that's
own
exactly-
personal values. So there's things that he will do, he won't do based upon his own personal
Yep.
feeling, his own religious beliefs, his own family upbringings. But it wasn't an artificial boundary set by organizational rules.
But they still exist.
Yes.
So, I just have just a question that we just briefly talked about in the beginning when you said that have no fear, like have that no risk type, taking no risk attitude. If you have someone that's really great, she's really good with people, but she's just really afraid of taking risk. How can you teach someone to have that mentality, or is it just like made taking no risk?
I think there's many ways to do that, and one of the things I think we could do is you take risks incrementally. You see what makes you comfortable in those risks. So pushing those boundaries of this. I'm going to give you just an example. My natural inclination when Tom said, "Can you come here and talk?" and it's going to be videotaped, I said, "No way." I am not comfortable with that. I rather not, because sometimes I'm afraid what comes out of my mouth. But I realized it's like what you're saying. I won't grow professionally myself. I won't learn myself if I don't go into those type of environments. So those kind of steps. What's causing you not to take those risks? Take a look at it. Do that risk analysis. For yourself, and say, where can I take these risks? I always go back to my brother-in-law because I'm just so proud of what he's able to do, and those risks that he took. You know what I mean? To refinance his own home, to use the equity to build into another business. For myself at the time, I was thinking, there's no way. I got 3 kids; they're all going to school. But those were the risks I wasn't willing to take, and he was. the interesting thing about it is, you know, I look and along the way, he's such just a great leader in itself that along the way, he was saying it, but I wasn't listening. As he was growing and he was moving forward, not only was he growing and being successful, he was encouraging me to go along with him to that process. And I just wasn't even listening because I wasn't willing to take those risks.
I think there's a difference between a gamble and a risk too.
Yeah, that's great, yeah.
Don't gamble, but risk.
I'll try not to.
How do you deal with people who are complacent? They're just completely okay. They're they accept mediocrity, and
Right.
as an organization that wants to keep growing, ever learning, do you try and keep trying to sculpt them, like maybe unintentionally, or what do you take from that experience dealing with those people, whether it's your subordinates or not?
So in our organization, both in the military and in the police department, is so large. There's different niches for people. There's certain jobs people can do, and some people who don't want to go above and beyond, and they want to just perform certain tasks. It just happens within that organization. There may be a niche for that. Not that we want that, but that's just the reality of life, right? But go back to is this: if that person is not performing to the level that he or she should be performing at, is to coaching. Have you went talk with that person? How did that person best learn through that process? Going through that schooling, training, mentoring, but then you always have to go back to the accountability piece. Because as much as you want to do that, even in a safe organization as the Army or the police department, there are times when we have to just tell people, you have to go. You have to go find something else to do. But should never become a surprise to someone. I mean, these are conversations that should be taking place, mentorship, it needs to be documented, but because as an individual, a friend of mine from the National Guard told me this, and I say, not exactly, but he says, every day when you wake up, you gotta look in the mirror and say, are you the person that you claim who you claim to be? Are you the leader who you claim to be? So you have to go through all that process and know deep in your heart, in your mind, that you've done everything you can to help develop and move that person forward. Because if you don't, and that person goes along the way, doesn't know what happened, can you really look at yourself in the mirror and go, yeah, I did the right thing? If you do, I'm telling you, you're not a great leader. You may be in a leadership position, but you're not a great leader.
Add on to that, I don't know, I guess your process of what's your goal to be at the level you are, but at a certain level when you were at a lower grade, when did you figure out that I have to be a better follower and a better subordinate?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things that they first teach us in our organizational leadership courses is this: in order to be a great leader, you got to be a great follower. So when I hear people say, "Don't be a follower, be a leader," I'm going, stop saying that. Yeah. Because the reason why is a follower doesn't mean following someone blindly. That means in our room here, we are. We have some great people just sitting here at this table, and if something occurred and one of us is designated as a leader, we know how difficult that he or she, that position is going to be. In order for us to support that person, we have to be a great follower, have to know the intent, have to know how we can help that person succeed as a leader. Those sounds like leadership traits, but they're followership traits, and they're really entwined. It's just based upon, the follower leader is who's in that positional leadership position. So you have to be a great follower to be a great leader.
So when did you determine that, hey, I'm going to be a good follower? I mean, you didn't know where you were going to end up. And to me, from the hood, right? I said, F you, I'm out. You know, I had an attitude problem. And
Right.
it gets to a
Had?
Well, I have an attitude problem. But, you know, I'm trying to figure out personally, you know, like, I gotta be a better follower.
Yeah.
You know, because I'm in a different world now, because it's academic.
Mhm.
It's not the banking world.
Well, I think a couple steps happen. One is this, you know, you work in an organization wherever you're at, and I was happy doing what I'm doing. And then when you work for someone that's a horrible leader, and you think, oh boy, that person shouldn't treat people the way they are, how they talk to them, how they do things, and then you complain to your peers, and your peers talk about it, and you realize all that complaining, what does it do? It just makes it worse. The whole situation makes it worse. And then somebody who's smart in the group and go, well, if you think you can do a better job, why don't you take the test and be a leader? There's the first challenge. Then you become the leader, and you're like, boy, when I'm a leader, I'm going to do this. And then you realize, wait a minute, by the actions that I'm doing, I think I did all the right things, and we talked about all the right things. Then why do some people still dislike me, or they don't like my leadership? Man, it's just an ongoing process.
Fair enough, yeah.
I think it's interesting, Mike. Are you OCS or ROTC?
OCS.
OCS,
Yeah.
Me too. I think we call them spotlight rangers, the soldiers that when they're not in charge, they're dragging ass and not supporting the team. They were the worst troop. And then when they became a platoon leader or whatever, we rotated positions all the time. They became these Nazis, right? These four-finger commandants. That was South, right? All of a sudden they're in charge, and they wonder why no one then supported them. But the best leaders, and we're all rotating through these positions and being evaluated on, we're the best teammate, you know, when you're not in charge.
Oh, great point.
And, you know, cleaning, scrubbing the latrine down, and helping guys tighten their bunk when you have to do it. And then when you're in charge, that essentially that tit for tat, right? You've already paid into their bank, and they'll support you. So.
And we have to also understand, I'm glad you brought that up, and we also have to understand, and we know this. So we go through, and these folks that you're talking about, Ryan, and as we progress through our ranks, you know, and 20, 30 years down the road, and some of these people who are that way continue to get promoted, then what we can say is that person hasn't changed. And that's why people don't respect them as leaders, because they did exactly that. They'll shine when they think that it needs to shine, or they're being graded upon.
Yeah.
When you judge a leader, do you judge it more on results or process?
Boy, I think it has to be a combination, and it depends on what the process is, you know. Because I've seen some great projects being taken places, but when it was completed, they burned everybody out, and the team members will never be part of that team again, or never want to work with that leader again. But then again, you know, you can be the nicest guy in the world and everybody likes you, but you never completed a project. Yeah. then your effectiveness is dwindled.
Any more questions? Well, thank you so much. That was awesome. That was great, man.
All right, thanks. Appreciate that.